Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, it's good to be in Paris. Good to be back. Yes, thank you for the introduction, John. I'm going to present a vision to you, especially focusing on biomethane, which is the main product that the company I'm working for is trading in, and we believe it's one of the future keys to decarbonize our European energy system. The company I'm working for has been founded in 2007. It's based in Munich, Germany. We have 2 more offices in Germany, one in Budapest, Hungary. We have around 50 to 60 employees, depending who you count in. And yes, our focus, as I said, is biomethane trading, but also some additional services in that. Where are we right now? You see some of the snippets of the news of the last couple of months or years sometimes. There was a great potential. The biogas sector was, thank you. Hope you can hear me well now. Great potential of the biogas sector, especially in Germany. There was a momentum. The rate of increase was huge, but it has basically come to a stop, which doesn't stop us believing in biomethane. Our vision basically is a circular, biomethane economy, where we've looked at the biomethane production and cross-referenced it with the factors determining its greenhouse gas value. And this basically means that biomethane could remove 150 million tons of CO2 in the EU atmosphere alone in a year, if you look at this circle that way. What are the framework conditions to have that? Do we even have enough biomethane? Is there enough renewable gas, so to say, to play a significant role? What you see here are some studies, as well German as EU studies, showing the potential of biomethane production as of the perspective we know right now. As John mentioned, of course, it's always hard to predict the future, especially if it's the long-term future in 2050 probably for most of this market is a long-term future, but these studies try. So in the end, what you see is that if you look at the EU studies, biomethane production could scale up to 1,000 terawatt hours by 2050. And that being said, the production would of course be at a significantly lower cost as we have it today. What do we need to scale it up? We have to focus on biomethane, we have to focus on this kind of renewable gas. We have to reach a density of biogas production and biomethane production as we have it as of now in Germany. And even further, we had to increase that level of production by around 30%, which is possible. We do have the feedstock, we do have the technology, it's a mature technology. This is a possible scenario. People might say, maybe biomethane, it's a gas, it's not as climate friendly as you would think. Here is a slide where we basically compare natural gas to the different feedstock-based biogases that are existent right now. So as you can see, natural gas has around 68 grams per megajoule of CO2 emissions, and as of now, there's already a 50% reduction if you use biomethane from maize, even more if you use manure or a bio-waste. At the right-hand side, you can see the different main sources of CO2 emissions or emissions in general that we have right now. So in cultivation, it's field emissions, it's fossil-based fertilizers. Within the biogas plant, there's some methane leakage we right now can really get rid of. In the upgrading plant, there is electricity consumption as well as in the filling station, and the current EU mix is used to present that, which is, of course, right now not all renewable, but there's some coal left, there's some other fossil energy sources left. But if we continue to envision something, what would happen if we are in the year 2050? Of course, natural gas would still have the same greenhouse gas emissions, but some of the sources of emission for biomethane would be drastically reduced or even eliminated. So for maize, we calculate that with lower CH4, N2O emissions, and so on, you could have a reduction of up to, well, over 90% compared to natural gas. And the main sources of emissions now would only be the field emissions and the methane leakages. Since we would use renewable fertilizers instead of fossil fertilizers, we would use fuel for transportation and machinery, which is renewable as well, and the electricity mix should, by 2050, hopefully, be all renewable. So within now this basic construct of this panel, we would say that not only does biomethane have the possibility to reach a zero CO2 emission level, but as a renewable energy source, it could also even help further decarbonizing our energy system and therefore other fossil energy sources. How do we do that? Basically, in the process of production right now, we already have some sort of carbon capture system. So some of you might, of course, have heard about and maybe talked about the different possibilities of carbon capture and storage or carbon usage. After all, in producing biogas, but also, or in the way of producing biomethane, carbon is eliminated or separated from the methane in order to have a pure natural gas fitting methane which can be put into the grid. Therefore, there is a huge potential for decarbonization in that. Right now, most of the CO2 is emitted into the air, which of course is not the best option, and there would be different other options to make better use of that. So for example, you could use the existing gas infrastructure. In Germany, for example, there are some low gas pipelines which could be used, which are not commonly used anymore, in order to transport the CO2 to some storage fields, which could be, for example, empty gas fields or other structures. Of course, you could also use it in some parts, so get fossil CO2 out of systems that it is used for right now in food production, in all sorts of chemical industries. You could use the biogenic CO2 instead. And if you look at this, and depending of course on the feedstock you use, there would be additional greenhouse gas savings from up to 50 grams per megajoule, on top of the now 92% reduction that I showed you before on the slide, meaning we are already in a decarbonizing stage. We are below zero, basically. One of the baseline needs here is that if we do carbon capture and carbon storage, we shouldn't be using it for fossil carbon that helps to, I don't know, reduce gas or oil CO2 emissions. But in order to be all renewable and help to even further decarbonize our energy system, these storage places should be reserved for renewable CO2, so to say. This is, of course, a strange term. And there, as you can see in the picture, are different possibilities. I already mentioned one with the gas lines, and if you're acquainted with carbon storage, you might know and see that there are different possibilities also within Europe in order to store carbon relatively safely, and the technology is almost there. Last question, basically, cost, which of course the economic perspective is always very important. Doesn't biomethane plus carbon capture and storage cost way more than other alternatives that we have right now? We have made some assumptions based, of course, on different studies, and you could at least say that most of them are relatively sound and proof. So if you consider a natural gas price at a level of 25 euro per megawatt hour, which basically considers the default value which is mentioned in the Fuel Quality Directive on the European level, if you have hydrogen from dedicated renewable energy sources, where we used prices from the studies of Trinomics and Navigant, if you assume that the greenhouse gas values for 2050 for biomethane and carbon capture and storage are the ones that I already presented before, and the prices for biomethane is almost on the level that we see it on the graph to the right, which is also according to current studies, and even consider that storing, of course, of the carbon used or separated from the biogas also comes at a cost of, now we said 20 euros a ton. You can see that especially with a rising carbon tax price or rising price for carbon itself, which definitely is going to come. Most of the European countries already have a carbon tax. Many are trying to implement it now. You can see that natural gas is going to become more expensive as we go. Hydrogen, more or less, is going to stay the same. At least that's what we envision. It's pretty expensive right now. The technology is not very far. Maybe there's going to be a little price reduction, but this is nothing that we really can't predict as of now. What we can say that the two biomethane streams from different feedstocks, here being waste and maize with carbon capture and storage, will significantly reduce their costs. So at around a price of 150 tons euro per ton CO2, you will see that the price lapse of biomethane will become cheaper than for natural gas. What's the conclusion of all this? What's the conclusion of our Vision 2050 for renewables, renewable gases, biomethane? We say that we can even achieve negative emissions from biomethane if we use the right feedstock and if we use carbon capture and storage. We say that 1,000 terawatt hours of biomethane, which is possible in order to produce by 2050, plus carbon capture and storage, will reduce 150 million tons per year of CO2 within the European atmosphere. And which is also always an important factor if you look at renewables or new visions for new technologies, there's even a way to support the gap between rural and urban areas by providing 50 to 30 billion euros for CO2 and even 35 to 45 billion for biomethane by sustaining around 500,000 jobs in rural areas, which is of course of huge importance as well. We can always talk about costs for the energy itself, but we also have to talk about development and the areas which might not have the advantages that urban areas tend to have in the future. By that, I'd like to thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.